So Manas, I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself and then jump into your question.
Hi, Nilesh. Hi, Madhu, Brian. Excited to be part of the Let's Talk episode. So, this is Manas. I am currently working with 𝘵𝗵𝘃 Group. I've had 5 years of experience now in this employer branding and recruitment marketing domain. Earlier, I was with Wipro, and from the standpoint of my educational background, I pursued HR degree. I passed out in 2017. Currently, I lead certain center level projects for ABG, and also I advise ABG businesses on practices in employer branding.
Thank you for that brief introduction, Manas. So it sounds like the scale is a thing because 𝘵𝗵𝘃 Group is a massive organization, right? So here's a test. If I pulled an employee value proposition and three competitors' EVP, removed all the logos and shuffled them, could anyone tell them apart? And in a conglomerate your size, is that even a problem or is that even considered a problem?
So, Nilesh, when you talk about conglomerates, by nature is that it consists of multiple businesses. Each have their own business context, cultures, ways of working. So let's take ABG's cement business, for example. And if you compare it with a newly launched jewelry business, Indria, the cement is heavy machinery, process-based, people located in remote locations versus Indria, tier two plus tier one stores, customer-facing business, pace is very different. So you see the employee experience is going to be very different. Now, when it comes to the uniting threads, what unites us as a group, I would say the intangibles would be our values, purpose, while the tangible part may be something like a central level leadership development program or our internal jobs platform. So our current EVP is a world of opportunities, and I believe that it resonates with across all our businesses. And when it compared to the external market, let's say conglomerates like Tata or maybe Reliance, Godrej of the world, you'd see a similar pattern. Someone working in TCS, they may not have the same experience as someone working in Tata Chemicals. While the uniting thread, the core values, the code of conduct principles, they remain the same. So your question regarding the, let's say, positioning statement of EVP, if we reshuffle it, honestly, I don't think that talent looks at that from that perspective. They focus more on their own research, their own perception when they talk to their peers, their networks, and what's in it for them in terms of the tangibles. So people are intelligent, they are aware. Frankly, it won't make a difference.
So you're saying the perceptions are formed amongst the talent pool. They're based on some information out there. And I guess we are trying to say that information that brands put out there sort of does influence that perception forming at any scale. So that's a very good point. Thank you for raising it, Manas. Madhu, if I could get you to introduce yourself, and then I have a related question for you.
Thanks, Nilesh. And so, just a quick introduction. I've been in the content industry for over 17 years now. Done pretty much everything from advertising, marketing, social media, tutorial, and more recently, employee branding. I started that journey in 2014 with Flipkart, and that was the golden era of e-commerce. And quickly moved to Swiggy, which is into quick commerce, and then took care of the Southeast Asian market with Gojek for their branding. And that was a conglomerate, right? And we can talk about it. And more recently, I work with a London-based fintech company called Tide, and we just recently launched our EVPs. More on that.
Brilliant. So you're not new to the scale that I was going to put in your question here. So what I wanted to get to is, you've heard Manas talk about the scale and the challenge that comes along with it. But does that reality make your job harder, or does it actually give you more material to work with?
It's a bit of a paradox, right? Scale both complicates and enriches the whole value proposition game. If you think of an EVP as a customer value proposition for any organization, it has three things to do. One is attract the right customers, and in this case the right talent, and reduce the friction of hiring. Then it's about reducing turnover, which Gartner says is about 70%, and I'm not completely bought into that. And ultimately improve bottom line, right? Conglomerates face the challenge of maintaining that for decades at volume, which is a massive challenge. The sheer size means curating the right people gets even harder. So they invest in a lot of long tail benefits, which means you have more learning programs, you have communities of practice, you have CSR, leadership enablement programs, all to drive better retention as they go ahead in that journey. And this is not about quick wins. It's all about non-regrettable long-term decisions. I've seen this while building the EVP for the GoTo Group. And GoTo Group was 4 different companies, very different companies at very different stages of the EVP journey under one master umbrella brand. Whereas smaller companies run in sprints, and when I talk about sprints, it's different threads of a larger journey, right? Like phase 1 is scaling and talent attraction, right? More to do with customer acquisition, right? How do you attract the right people and how do you acquire the right customers? Phase 2 is more to do with scaling, right? How do you scale the business? How do you improve the kind of product ranges you have? And phase 3 is more to do with profitability and how do we hit EBITDA. And now EVP in that journey evolves at different stages, and it cannot be static at that point of time. So I had to put it in one sentence. An EVP becomes unmistakably unique when it's a living idea, not a slogan, and shaping itself to scale and not losing clarity of what your larger objective is. And similar to what Manas said, right? As long as you have your mission and values at the core of it, it's a direction you take which is quite different.
Yes, it does. I guess, and there's one thing that I'm going to park for now, but I'll come back to it. You both, in a sense, mentioned what you reflected on the last thought there, that it's not a static view and EVP is a living idea. A lot of people don't think of it that way. I guess you need to take a marketing or an advertising mind to think of it as like, it needs to live in people's mind. Every time people interact with it, it has to have a meaning. It is a new thing that needs to grab people's attention. And you also mentioned 2 different stakeholders. You're thinking about value proposition for customers and then value proposition for employees. 2 different stakeholders, but they could either be, your employees can be your customers and your customers can eventually become your employees. So I get that very interesting aspect you called out as well. We are going to go to Bryan. He's a resident expert, co-founder and CEO of Let'z Talk. Bryan, you've had both Manas and Madhu bring EVP concepts and why it can't be too generic alive. You've had experience with both massive organizations and startups trying to build authentic EVP. Who has it harder when trying to sound distinctive, and why do you think so?
So, good question, Nilesh, because both have unique challenges. Both also have real advantages. I will actually start off with what Madhu was talking about, and Manas said that as well, that your EVP is living. I always draw the analogy that look at your EVP as a plant. If you don't water it, if you don't look after it, if you don't give it what it needs, it's just going to die. And so for people who don't understand what EVP is, it is living, breathing. It is there. You don't see it, but you experience it. So I always give this analogy. Think of it like a potted plant, and you have to keep looking after it. Otherwise, it just won't bear fruit. That coming to your question, Nilesh. Look, startups get painted as the easy mode for EVP work, right? Because they're supposedly authentic by default. But I think that misses what's actually happening. They're not more authentic. They're just figuring themselves out in real, which comes with its own complications. Big organizations, on the other hand, have a complexity problem, not an authenticity problem. You've got thousands of people across different countries, different teams, different experiences. That's incredibly hard to capture in one narrative. But here's what's cool about that is the diversity of experience means you get so many genuine stories to tell. The mistake isn't that big companies can't be distinctive. It's that they often aim for a universal message instead of being honest. We know that everyone's story is different. So how can everybody be one thing? Most larger companies tend to smooth out all the edges, trying to make everyone happy. And then you end up with what? Oh, we are collaborative. We are people first. We are innovative, which I think describes almost, I would say, 70% of corporates. I mean, does anybody say, no, we don't innovate? No, we are not collaborative. No, we don't care about our people. So what I've learned is that people don't fall in love with perfect. They fall in love with specifics. Now, startups, they've got the opposite challenge. They're distinctive. Yes, they know what makes them different. The challenge is building credibility around it. The opportunity for startups is that they can move fast. They can test, iterate, and evolve as their story grows because they're a small team, so it's easy to pivot. That's actually a superpower if you use it right. Startups don't need to find their voice. They need to back it up actually with more proof points. So the short of the long is, I think both have it equally hard, just differently. Big companies have incredible resources, data, and stories. They just need to stop trying to please everyone, or stop trying to look cool. Another thing that's coming to my mind is like, listen, you're going to be like the driver on Indian roads, and don't hate me for this. You will create a lot of chaos if you're not going to follow a lane, which means that you can take short time to reach anywhere if you if you stick to a lane, but if you're all over the place, that same journey is going to take you much, much longer. What say? I'm not
I
India, but I'm not India shaving. I love India.
No, no, see, it is a chaos, and I guess you have to be a part of that chaos, because if you start following rules that nobody else is following, you become the problem, right? So you are becoming a problem for people driving behind you, people driving ahead of you or next to you, right? It is what it is. You have to be part of the mix,
And
otherwise you will
mindful.
stick out. And correct, and you're going to create anxiety for yourself. Now, this is where we are coming to, like, when you're part of something, the concept today we're trying to deal with is like, what is too generic and why is there a need for us to be unique, right? So we can put a lot of advertising spins on value propositions and statements that we put out there. What comes to my mind is, and it hasn't left my mind, it's like episode of Mad Men where John Draper says, and that's quintessentially describing his character. It says he's coming up with an ad slogan for a cigarette company back in 50s. And he says, it's toasted and it's something else, right? And the man sitting across who's listening to this says, but everybody's tobacco is toasted. What is unique? He's like, yeah, but you'll be the first person saying it. And after that, everybody else starts saying it because that's what sells. Now, bring it to another end of it. I just watched a clip of Korean, the mastermind behind Amul, right? When he was coming to market saying that we produce this butter, and Delhi dairy creates butter, but they call it something very regional. Nobody buys it. Nobody even knows they make butter. Versus we had to name our butter so that people would recognize it. And they came up with the name Amul in a specific way. But his advice he got at that point was that call your butter Polson or King's butter or Britannia or whatever. Otherwise, it won't sell. Because ethos of people eating butter at that point were affluent Indians. But what we're trying to get to is we will just try to shift the dial here and say, let's take examples. So we will do a bit of diagnosis to say what's generic and what's unique and what's specific. So if I were to present you a case file and say when EVP goes bold or breaks bad. So before we dive into the theory, let's look at two real examples that made noise. So example number one is the bold move where Netflix and its famous "We are a team, not a family" culture, and the culture memo, which was polarizing, it was controversial, and some employees left because, who says things like that? And others said, you know what, at least it's honest, because we've all had that colleague where someone says, we are family, and someone rolls their eyes and you know exactly who you're talking about in this team that you would not consider family, right? So we all have that experience. So some people said, at least that's honest. They may not consider it as a value proposition, but they take from it that, this brand is honest. They will say things as they are, and it's unmistakably Netflix. So that's cool. And the second example I would like to use is of the backfire, I would like to call it. It's of the WeWork and the hustle harder culture, right? And culture, and their mission was elevate the world's consciousness. What does that even mean? Until, the IPO collapsed, mass layoffs hit, and employees realized that the EVP was built on a quicksand. That means it was just using platitudes and generic motherhood statements that felt good when you heard it, but no one was practicing it. No one said that, I will not fire these people. We have to elevate their consciousness. So let's give them something instead, right? So to Manas, could you ever pitch "we are a team, not a family" across the businesses you work with? Or would that be a career suicide in a conglomerate like yours?
Think of it like this. When we look at our target audiences, people from the age groups of 25 to 35 or the Gen Zs of the world versus, let's say, ABG's primary talent pool in manufacturing, located in tier 2, tier 3 cities, perhaps remote locations. So maybe one single generic statement, even if it's brutally honest, may not work well that well. Do think that TA professionals sometimes tend to overplay the role of statements, taglines, and positioning. And if I had to ask you a question, Nilesh, what are the top 5 organizations that you aspire to work for? It could be BCGs of the world, Microsoft, maybe NVIDIA now. But can you really recall any of their EVP statements or positioning statements? Chances are not. You can't. So people don't really recall taglines. They may remember certain campaigns, but they are smart. So they are intelligent. They read reports. And nowadays, ESG reports are also something which try to cover aspects related to your people policies, metrics related to, let's say, number of people that you hired, what are the policies that you have for diversity. So intelligent people, yes, they do their own research. Now, when it comes to active candidates, people who are really looking for a job change, in that case, it does not really matter what kind of research they're doing. It's just a job switch case for them. So when it comes to pitching in conventional EVP, it can be done if there is a rationale. Or let's say, if I do a survey of my employees and majority of them say, okay, I connect with, let's say, aggressiveness as a key quality, or let's say behavior that I display in my day-to-day interaction, that can be pitched if there is a rationale. And interestingly, within ABG, there is this company Century Group, which actually uses an unconventional positioning statement. It's called TEAM, called tough, energetic, aggressive, motivated. So it works for them because it's put in their context. So it really depends on what are the needs of the businesses.
You're on the money with that because I guess it's the brand recall that one has and the aspiration that brand creates. I'll give you an example. Around COVID, FANGs, which was called Facebook, Alphabet, Netflix, Google, Salesforce, these were the big brands that people thought of because these people went out of the limb, went out and gave their employees a lot of money to buy home office setups because you can be anywhere and work from anywhere. And I was just baffled because I worked for a consulting firm and they couldn't even ship monitors, screens for us to work from home. But the expectation was we would still work 10, 12 hours because that's the remit that we've all been given. And some employees also had experience of at least be glad you have a job. A lot of people are losing a job, right? So that became a thing that we were not laid off even when times were tough. So I get it that, people may attach aspiration to go work for a particular brand. But having said that, I don't mind naming names, but when people say Amazon, they're like, I'm all for cheap goods. I don't want to work for them. I'm not going to ever go and work in their warehouse, but even in their offices, there is dog eat dog world and people know how competitive it is because your aggressiveness is rewarded with money, affluence, position, titles, travel, whatnot, right? So I relate to the answer that you just gave then because, it's about people make very, very strategic and sensible decision based on what is on the offer, what can I get from it? And therefore, this is the proposition I'm willing to accept. Madhu, if I could come to you, sticking to the concept of being brutally honest, is brutal honesty the same as authenticity? Or can you be authentic without being harsh?
So I'll just add to the narrative that Manas and you kind of built up, right? And this question kind of perfectly fits that. You mentioned Netflix initially. So Reed Hastings had dropped the no rules around 2019, and that was an unapologetic pitch, right? That we are a team and not a family, and kind of set the whole culture wheel in motion. But context matters, right? That was also the golden era of OTTs, which meant people already knew about Netflix. They were already lining up for jobs in Netflix, and the product kind of pulled them in, and the EVP simply told them what it takes to stay. Today the game has shifted, right? Candidates have infinite access to transparency with Glassdoor and Reddit and Blind and whatnot. You can't bluff culture for too long, right? And so has the tonality moved from saying this is who deserves to be here to this is how you can thrive here. And if you look at today's market, at least if you look at the Southeast Asian side of the world, right, it is a demand-heavy market. Every role you publish on LinkedIn, there are about 300, 400 applicants in the first day. Right? Companies don't need to hard sell culture, but they do need to be brutally clear about what thriving looks like in their part of the world. And because authenticity isn't about being harsh, it's about being unmistakably true. And find people figuring out that fits faster than you think. For organizations who understand that EVP is more of a push statement and a marketing statement to attract those who don't know about the brand, it works, right? But I think for the rest of the world, you are smart enough to do your research and kind of figure out what culture looks like in an organization, which would have been quite different maybe, let's say, 10 years back.
Because, the moment you said these two things, what came to my mind was I'm old enough to say that, my very first job was after reading an advert in a newspaper, and newspaper advertisement slots were very expensive. So you had to be very precise in what you were writing in those ads, right? And your brand logo was your logo. And then there are specific things mentioned about you should be A, B, and C. If you think this is a good thing, call us here, right? And today we read these massive 3-page long JDs. When you go for interviews, you don't see any of those things mentioned. And this is who we are reflecting on screen when you're speaking to people on Zoom calls, or if you meet them in person. I'm like, what are you on about? People can make up their mind. So I guess that's what I was coming from. Like, people do make up their mind based on how reality meets them. It's not about the words that you put on a piece of paper, LinkedIn, whatever. I get it. So, Bryan, we will go back to the examples and cases that we use. And if you could reflect on the WeWork example I mentioned earlier, where what made WeWork's EVP fail? Was it the language itself? Do you think there was a gap between the promise and reality that we are sort of alluding to in our discussion before this?
I think there's a lot we can learn from a WeWork, and I've done some great amount of reading. In my opinion, I think the language used in the EVP wasn't the issue at all. In fact, their messaging around community, purpose, and reimagining work was genuinely compelling. And because those are the kinds of messaging I have used in EVPs for brands that I've worked with. And I know that people have connected. So I'm pretty sure that that EVP has connected with the ones who joined, WeWork. The vision of creating more than just an office space, building a community where people can thrive, I'm pretty sure that has resonated, especially, after COVID and things like that. Challenge, of course, I feel, and I've experienced this firsthand, is the gap between what was promised and what could be sustained when the business started facing serious pressure. So, people, I guess it was communicators saying, join us in building something meaningful. You're a part of the movement. We care about community and people, not just profits. You can smell a lie in today's day and age. You can hear people say those words, but you can also hear people just saying those words, not really meaning them. See, what became difficult, in my opinion, for WeWork, what became difficult to maintain is the financial realities. Now, I worked with this company, and the company actually turned around and said that we are no more an IPO, we're selling. So what happens to people who had built their plans based on that IPO? Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And then suddenly was slapped with this message saying that actually we're selling, right? I got to know that people were laid off over conference calls, right? That said goodbye. That was not mentioned in the EVP, right? So people don't expect, like, okay, you're firing me, but can you do it with dignity? I'm not doing this, but can you give me some respect? All of that was written in some way or the other, in some form or the other with WeWork, but it wasn't really practiced. So going back to the age-old saying, practice before you preach. And it comes back to that. That's where I feel the downfall of WeWork. Because I believe your EVP lives in the gap between what you promise and what you protect, especially when times get hard.
So I see that you said that their intentions were correct. They may have imagined themselves to wanting to be all that they said they are. So the gap was they were saying we are this, that, and the other. But the truth is we are also a profit-making business. And if we stop making profit, we can't be who we say we want to be, which means it will be something else. So the idea here is it failed. And then they said, because we failed, there is no reason for us to keep up the appearance. Let's just be honest, brutal financial transaction that we were, and let people go. I get it. And reality is sometimes harsh and people have to face it, right? It's just that you don't have to live with the experience. Madhu, I think you're trying to comment there.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point that Brian mentioned, right? And if you recently saw the H1B visa case and what Shahryar did with the MetaView brand, it was an open invitation saying, hey, we don't care if we have to spend that money. We still want the best talent. And sometimes it's just the founder setting that context, right? You should check MetaView. MetaView is a brilliant application by itself for talent management. But what the founder did kind of spoke in volumes about their EVP. Yeah.
Like to say to that, like most people, and I've seen this with companies time and time again, is that, and it's a good thing, but it's not a good thing, is that EVPs are built or EVPs are created on an aspiration. This is what I want to be. But actually, no, it should not be built on an aspiration. It should be built on what happens if I start going down. What happens when things get really, really bad. Everybody can say, I want this, I want that, but you're coming from a space of a good space. But building an EVP, when you say, this is the worst case scenario, then there is a lot more chance for honesty. There's a lot more chance for you being a lot more pragmatic and say, okay, if this happens, I'm going to be, otherwise you're just talking marketing jargon. It doesn't make sense. Like I'm here in Gurgaon and it is so much fun to see all the taglines on these. My favorite one is, which I saw yesterday. I know I'm digressing, but I have to say this. Someone said that we serve the best fresh beer. I'm like, really? I mean, what are you saying? Fresh beer. Okay. Anyway, I'll leave.
That's a very good way of saying it. Fresh beer. But I guess it's a thing, I can reflect and give an example of that because there's this one thing in Bombay, especially South Bombay. It's a very vegetarian market. Right? It's vegetarian for a specific reason. So everything, if it is special, it has to be say like malai marke. That's the colloquial lingo. And when we grew up, when someone said like malai marke, it really means like, I want to give you something special. So it would get applied in things that were not even related to tea. So if you're asking for tea or milk and you gave malai marke, it meant like, you're going to get specialty. But even if I'm giving you service, I'm like, oh, this service is malai marke. It did become a verb after a point. We don't hear it anymore because people don't speak in their own native languages. But we are going to go to that gap that, all three of you mentioned. And I guess I'll come to you, Manas. You've been quiet for a while. So I'm going to spin your question up first. And the question I had in mind for you was like, when you inherit a business within, say, ABC that has the kind of gap, let's imagine there is the gap. Do you fix the experience first, which we were talking about, the cohort's experience could be your customers, your employees, doesn't matter. Or do you change the language? And what is the order of operation? What happens first for you?
So if I talk about my own experience in terms of last 2-3 years, the companies that we have acquired, or let's say in businesses which we have ventured into, be it paints or jewelry, it's always about the experience, fixing the experience first, marketing follows. But at the same time, our businesses do have some sense of autonomy in terms of running some campaigns, marketing stories, while they parallelly fix those experiences. There is this flexibility always there for certain businesses, depending on the need. Now, at the same time, I want to shift the lens to talent acquisition professionals also. Their primary role is to fill the roles, close the roles. Even if the organization feels broken or experience is not fixed, they have to do the tough job of convincing those candidates that yes, this is the place to work. We do acknowledge our problems, but we are taking step A, B, and C to fix this. And that's why we are a great place to work. So how we can train our PA professionals to engage better and interact in a manner that satisfies the needs of the prospective talent is what is something very crucial in my point of view. I hope that answers some of it.
It does, because sometimes I hear you say that, it's important to fix the experience first, and people can think of it when you're thinking of customers, right? You can't go to market and say, we will sell you something without really having the product to sell. I get that. So I guess, Madhu, is there a version where you would advise a client, do not touch EVP yet, or fix what is broken first, or is changing the language part of the fix itself?
Two mistakes that I see all the time with EVP is, first, companies treat it like a marketing slogan, so something to advertise and not necessarily something to live. And secondly, they think EVP is about describing the present, and it is not, right? It should be the present continuous that they're talking about, right? The journey you are on. So to your question, do you fix or do you reframe? The truth is, it's almost always both, and the statement and the fixing goes hand in hand. Like if your promise is, for instance, create impact at scale, and you're not saying you have already nailed it, right? You are inviting the right people to help you make it happen. That way the language is a part of the shift. It doesn't cover the cracks. It points to the direction where you need to travel.
And Bryan, you introduced this concept to the discussion as well, right? The whole about gaps. So let's stress that gap and say, give us the ugliest mismatch you've seen between EVP promise and actual employee experience. Because the real thing is you really need employees first before you can actually create products or services and then sell to the market, right? So real example, you don't have to name names, but you could name names. I know you're very brave. You could do that. If you need to protect the guilty, that's fine. So floor is yours.
I will try not to name names. I'll try. No, there's quite a few. My God, I could write a book on the amount of companies that I've worked with that, that gap is so big. But I've got one that really that has struck with me. Nilesh should know this, that there's a lot of industry associations in Australia, correct? I worked for one such industry association. I know their focus was basically family businesses. They had built this really compelling EVP around nurturing professionals and supporting their growth as they support family businesses. And great messaging, lots of talk about professional development, being valued, creating a supportive community. We invest in you, we care about your well-being, the usual. Correct? Professional development existed on paper, but was just not possible to access because the reality was far from collaborative. When concerns were raised about burnout or asked for support, they were often told, and when I say they, I included, was often told that, we are making a great impact in the family business world. And hey, look, if required, if it's all getting too much, then you can take a mental day off. Essentially, guilting each and every one of us with the mission, right? The part that really, really got to me, which is unfortunately very common in associations, just for your benefit, Madhu and Manas, but instead of addressing the systemic issues, they double down on the calling and the passion. And all of this became another call out in their recruitment ads and, messaging. Basically, they were recruiting idealistic new professionals to replace the burned out ones, using the same promises that hadn't been kept the first time. In this entire experience, what stuck with me was that when you use purpose as a substitute for support, you're not building culture. You're basically burning people out in the name of a mission. With gaps and mismatch, I think the most damaging EVPs that I have seen happens or I've seen go out of the window is when you use your mission to paper over operational failures. And that is always the biggest issue. That it's all written very well, but leaders not held accountable, leaders not even knowing what their EVP is all about, and leaders, basically every leader saying, don't disturb me, I'm too busy, I am put my head down working, whereas your EVP is saying, we are collaborative. Even this, the business that I'm talking about, everybody was working from fear. They came from a place of fear, so much so that the boss used to get upset if anybody left before him. How many times have we seen that happen, right? And so everybody would peek over the cubicle to say, oh, is he still there? If he is there, then they'll just sit there, do nothing because they've finished their work. And then once he's left, then everyone's dashed out. So much so they would go through, look out the window to see has the car gone. And so then they would go. Imagine your EVP, where is that now when you're talking about all of these things, right? So I think your EVP can't promise to protect people from challenges, but I think what's really important is that it must promise and deliver protecting people from issues like this, which are preventable. And they, in turn, create issues for the organization, right? Leaders need to be held accountable. They need to be pulled up. They may say that it's not easy for them, but bad behavior is not.
And there's no one else policing. Sometimes that's why we tell leaders need to be self-aware, right? Like, be aware of the amount of hurt you create. If you're not aware of it, you can't lead because we are not perfect. And we expect too much from our leaders sometimes, I feel. Because sometimes I
But
feel like I'm
there's
one of the
been
leaders.
I've spoken to so many leaders, and most of them, my God, most of them say we've had a bad time when we were interns, and so this is how it is. This is how it's supposed to be.
It's a
No,
class, yeah. It's the classic when the oppressed becomes the oppressor, it's my time to rule over the others. But we are going to talk about some uncomfortable truth tests then.
I had a question for you. The company that you were talking about, don't these type of companies having rotten cultures, they die their own natural deaths? What happened to that company? Weren't the reviews too obvious? Shut down? Good
It's not shut because of all of these things. What happens, Australia, we realize, we are far more global than most of the Australian population because we are global because we think of these different affluent developed countries as our customers and we kind of, adopt mannerisms, language, culture, music, food, etc. very easily. We're sponge that way, right? And I think of Indian ethos differently because I live in Australia now. So, Madhu, you talk about stories employees tell secretly, the corridor conversations, maybe the Slack DMs or whatever communicator you guys use now at your place of employment. Give us one example. What is a story employee or employees tell at their workplace that the official EVP completely ignores? And should companies acknowledge that truth, or is that too risky?
I think Bryan touched upon this, and it's a bit controversial in that sense, right? But it's a pattern I've seen across almost every organization that I've worked. Culture isn't defined by your posters and policies, but more by the people you deal with on a daily basis, right? And if that starts with incompetent or unempathetic peers or leaders, the buck stops there. EVP can write poetry about collaboration or impact, but the lived reality is top down, unfortunately. If the people in power don't embody it, the narrative kind of collapses, and no matter what you write, what you put out on your career site, it doesn't matter. So yes, companies should acknowledge those uncomfortable truths because ignoring them doesn't make them disappear. And employers are already telling these stories on different platforms, right? You have your Reddits and your Glassdoors of the world, and I'm sure leadership is seeing this, but I sure hope they're doing something about it.
Brilliant. I love the part where you said you could write poetries about EVP. Have you written poetries about EVP, Manas? I'm just going to come and ask you, in your group size, do you ever get like a leadership sign off on EVP that admits a weakness alongside the strengths? I'm sure it's the way you pitch it, or does corporate communication always have to be aspirational?
As we speak, interestingly, actually, ABG, at a group level, we are working on revitalizing our current EVP. It was first launched in 2009, almost 16 years back. And with changing trends, Gen Z is coming to the fore, we entering new segments. And yes, through various surveys that we do, external plus internal, we sort of know. Emphasis is always on stability, learning, opportunities. But when it comes to actually promoting a brand, I guess we tend to be very strategic about showcasing our strengths. So that's the really important principle. And when you look at EVP as a statement on a whole, I believe it may click with a certain set of audiences, but not everyone. So single generic EVP statement may not work, even if it accepts our weaknesses. Some people may not really see the authentic side of what you're trying to portray. So that could be a challenge.
Brilliant answer there. Reflect on that, Bryan, for me. I've ever seen a company to name an uncomfortable truth in their EVP and say, this is hard, or we are still learning this, or this is how it will work.
I think everybody would know this. Patagonia is probably what comes to mind. It's one of the most famous examples that I can give. They literally tell people in their recruitment messaging, we are not perfect. We're still figuring out how to be responsible, how to be a responsible company. If you actually go onto their careers page, they talk about it openly, about the tension between growth and the environmental issues. They've said things like our supply chain has problems, we're working on it, and we make mistakes. It's great because they're showing a side of them which is vulnerable. It kind of comes across that, listen, it doesn't matter if you're a big company, but there is a side to you that you're aware of. There is a side that you may not be able to have a solution right now, but since you're aware, you're working on it. And that is on half the battle won, right? It works because they pay this whole thing is paired with genuine action. When they say we're learning, as I said, they show their work. They share their playlists publicly. People read. Some of the highest employee retention in retail is seen in Patagonia. People stay there on an average of, I think, about 4 to 5 years, which is remarkable for this industry. I think in today's day and age, 4 to 5 years, you probably should get a gold watch because in 2 years, everyone's out, right? So great. Nilesh would know this. Bunnings in Australia has been remarkably honest about their realities. Their recruitment doesn't pretend it's glamorous and whatever. They say weekend work is required. That's the nature of retail. You'll be on your feet most of the day. Customer service can be challenging, but they pair it with real benefits, like genuine programs, strong training programs. In fact, if you have seen a Bunnings ad or if you haven't, go on to Google, their ads are actually employee testimonials, which is perfect. It's genius.
I see where it works and where it doesn't work, but I guess it's the Bunnings example stands out for me because I don't know this particular brand. Bunnings is like, for your reference, it's like Home Depot of Australia. It's very truth-telling, very honest. Nothing is over the top. If you are simple and look real in your whole setup, that's what they want. So I get it. So I guess that's their brand as well, right? So they're staying honest to it. Coming to it, because the population's changing, and I guess the reference will start changing as well, I'm assuming. But if you were to do a TikTok test, and I'm not sure how big it is in India, but I'm sure there is a version of it because we see a lot of it. That's how I consume cultural content now, through Insta and TikTok. So I'll come to you, Manas. When your business, you've referred to Gen Z a couple of times, and when you recruit Gen Z at scale, for example, because that's going to be your prominent incoming workforce at scale, right? Are you briefing leaders on this power shift? What does it change about how you build and communicate EVP?
To your first point, Nilesh, so we do have an active HR strategy that focuses on enhancing the experience for Gen Z plus people who are into their first 10 years of their careers. Each and every business, they are actioning on certain pointers. And obviously, there are going to be rigorous reviews on an annual basis. So yes, that's a consideration. Secondly, we want to really understand the mindset of Gen Z. What do they want? Because, ABG traditionally, a large proportion of the workforce are middle to senior level employees. Maybe they are not attuned to the mindset of the Gen Z. So sensitizing them, making them understand what Gen Z is all about is a big part of this exercise. So training people, listening to the Gen Zs. And sometimes when we hire from campuses, it's all about pampering these guys in the first few days. So that's one important action item that all of our businesses are taking up through the strategy. So yes, and some of our businesses are also experimenting with concepts like communities of interest. The people coming together, organizing stuff related to something which they have common interest for. And businesses are also providing budgets for that. So how great is that? And finally, when it comes to communication of the EVP, yes. So we being transparent about our policies and building content pillars and stories around those aspects is how our businesses are going to take this communication part forward. And you will see those campaigns going out in the next few quarters.
Thank you for sharing that. No, Madhu, does this mean the storytelling brief has fundamentally changed, or that you are no longer writing a story, you are just hoping that employees will tell you the same one as you write?
I think the brief has definitely changed. We don't write the story anymore. We seed it and then see if employees tell it back in their own words. It's not difficult to know if the company's narrative and what employees are saying kind of line up. Like our own research has shown that LinkedIn and Glassdoor are now the top culture checkpoints. Not surprising, as one does not actively search for corporate culture content unless they are planning to make a shift, right? And that's telling, because those are half corporate content and half user-generated truths. And if the two don't resonate, then the story doesn't stick anyway.
I guess you touched upon a fact about employee testimonials featuring as your brand voice, so to say, right? So people see it. I guess if we would just ask you to dwell on that example and say, like, if your current employees, say Gen Z employees, are posting day in a life videos that sometimes contradict the official EVP, it's not really what we want to say, but employee has said it. And like Bunnings, my ethos is employees are my brand ambassadors. They tell the truth, right? Say 48 hours, within 48 hours of joining, someone has gone and posted something that sort of contradicts, your EVP ethos altogether. They are fact-checking employee brands in real time and in public. Is this transparency a threat, or it's an opportunity, or has it fundamentally changed the game?
Look, my first instinct in the past was I would look at it as a threat because, it's like, oh, what you're saying, and, you have to be careful and you have to pass it through comms and pass it through legal and all of those things. So the initial instinct was threat. But I think it's the best thing that's ever happened to employer branding. You know why? Because finally, employers are sitting up and saying, we can't, behave the way we are because someone somewhere is going to speak the truth. And it doesn't matter if that person has 50 followers. All you need is one reel to go viral for everything to spiral. Look at that example of that girl who nobody knew in Bangalore, where she called and her boss said to come into work or stay back. And she said, I don't want to stay back. That one video went viral. Now, surely, I don't know if she still has a job, but surely there are people who are watching. I worked with a company where they kept saying that we invest in grads, we, early careers, it's good fun and, come and work with us. Unfortunately, there was a grad joiner who posted on TikTok, because this is Australia I'm talking about, day 1, excited, great office, started showing whatever. Day 3, still haven't met my mentor. Day 7, working on a deck alone till midnight. And they put it up. So the grad obviously doesn't really care. Do I have a job? Do I not have a job? It's just like, I'm being honest. This is what it is. And immediately the employer saw that video testimonial and said, we need to bring all our leaders in. And then came the accountability. We need to put a mentorship program. We need to do this. We need to do that. So it is all real time. But I love Gen Zs. I mean, they're my favorite people. I think finally God has heard prayers. And so all bad behavior is being corrected by Gen Z. Gen Z isn't killing employer branding. They're killing fake employer branding, which is why I love them.
Brilliantly said. I don't think they are all godlike. They being, if there is us in them, I am part of. I love the bravery that they automatically have at the age that they have it. My generation, I am late millennial. What I'm trying to say here is that each generation has its own positives, and this is a very good positive. And I think I see it as this is good correction. So think of this forgiveness question. What I would like you to think of it as like, can an EVP effective if words are generic, but culture and experience are exceptional? Or in 2025, when every employee is a content creator and every town hall quote might become a LinkedIn post, has language itself become non-negotiable? So do you have to have those big, bold advertising-like language, or is experience of the culture important? Let's go to Manas.
So while you were asking this question, Nilesh, I was thinking about my own behavior when I go on LinkedIn. I scroll down tons of posts. I rarely engage with, let's say, content posted by even an organization that I dream to work for. Let's say BCG or let's say HUL Microsoft. But when I see a colleague of mine, peer or an alumnus, they sharing something, I tend to kind of like, okay, I tend to at least read, go through the stuff. And if I find interesting, I do engage. So that's the big difference when it comes to organizations advertising themselves versus your workforce, which is your employees. And once you fix that experience, the employee experience part of it, an organic way of promotion of, let's say, your brand automatically kicks in, which cannot certainly be overshadowed by what you market as an organization. From that point of view, I think words, more than words, who speaks is mattering most. And that's the positive trend that I've been seeing. And to your point, Bryan, moving towards transparency, people having a voice, that's good. The future looks bright.
If I bring same question to you, we're talking about use of generic words, but say the experience and culture is exceptional. Or do you think the words are also important?
Look, if I agree to what Manas is saying and what Madhu says, I think great culture always wins over clever words. But if your actual experience is exceptional, people will find their own ways to describe that language. Why do you need marketing teams when you've got real people saying real things? Listen, use that as your language, right? Because they're going to post about it. They're going to talk about it. They will refer to people. And so basically your employees become your EVP. I mean, it's not called employee value proposition for a reason. Right? So it's employee. So that's the whole point. If you are not able to articulate the differentiation between the various pillars, the question is, how did you build it? And did you ask questions? Did you say anything to anyone? Or you just sat in a boardroom and said, okay, this looks great. We're going to talk about this. And I know some people marketing people who have said, oh, the 4Cs sounds really good. Let's go ahead and create an EVP on the 4Cs. Not even opening the boardroom door and saying, hi, do you even know what the 4Cs are, kind of thing, or any of those questions. So EVPs created from AI, EVPs created in boardrooms are just jargon, and I feel it's a missed opportunity. Culture gets people to stay, but language gets them to show up. But the language that they say, not what you tell them to speak. Words are great, but words are great when they're a lived experience.
I buy
Great
everything
point.
each one of you have said.
I want to
Manas, come
question
on.
Nilesh. When you observe, let's say, behavior of a group, 80% of the people experiencing positive sentiments, not all of them are likely to go and shout it out to the world that, okay, I'm happy, I'm feeling great. While the folks who are having not so great experience, 20% of the lot, they'll go everywhere, talk about, let's say, platforms like Glassdoor, Ambition Box. What organizations can do is organically push people who are having good experience, go in the outside world and talk great things. Maybe taking some cues from the EVP, but the words have to be their own. The narrative has to come from the employee themselves.
Absolutely bang on. I guess that's what I was reflecting on is when I said I have controversial opinion on that. It's like, yes, people have the microphone. Yes, people can say a lot of things, but free speech does not come without consequences. So consequence could be, well, they will acknowledge the feedback you're providing, but you would still lose the job. So you should be prepared to lose the job. I'm not saying that everyone should pick up their camera and say what they feel like or what challenges they're facing at work, because work is not about not facing challenges, right? That's a given. So I'm thinking a lot of brands have very strong social media policy, which is good because not everything needs to be said out loud. Do you have policy of open box or a suggestion box sort of situation where you could give feedback internally? If you've exhausted all your internal mechanisms, you have all these other options available outside, but your opinions stay indoor because content doesn't come with expiry, right? So we come to the last segment of it. So if you were to think like, the one thing, only fix one thing about how organization approach EVP today. Just one lever that you could pull and that would have that biggest impact. What would it be? You can't do anything after this for a year, for example. Come on, be adults. Go for it. Open your mics. I'm not going to name names. So don't treat EVP as a side project. Leaders need to get involved. We ask too much of leaders, I feel. Manas, do you have a different opinion?
I concur what Madhu has said, but I also want to emphasize what Bryan said earlier. Like EVP is the kind of a bridge between, let's say, information that a talent has versus what your organization actually gives in terms of experience to your employees. So ideally, in future, we should move towards a world that fixes or reduces this gap of information asymmetry. Can we be more transparent about our policies? Can we publish it online? Can we showcase facts like, okay, this is the N number of hours that we have given to our employees this year. This is the average tenure before someone gets promoted in our organization. Maybe this kind of figure would work well for the Gen Zs. This is the trend of layoffs. We laid off 500 people in 2022. This year we have come down to maybe 100 people. Those kind of informational pieces certainly can bridge that trust deficit. And that perhaps could be a good evidence or proof point of how your organization seriously takes policies and EVP seriously.
Amazing. We're saying that to be unique or not be generic, we're saying just be honest. That's a very good take. Fresh. But do you think that's very hard to follow, Bryan? Of course, I'll give you that one thing. But is it hard to be honest? Because sometimes it can be inconvenient, right? To be honest.
It is hard to be honest because the main agenda of everyone in the business is people pleasing, and they're constantly doing that. everyone is trying to please the hierarchy, and everyone is trying to be the yes minister. I mean, there are very few people who really go back to someone and say, no, what you're saying is wrong. Everyone is sitting on a gold mine. When you're creating an EVP, refer to your exit interviews. They are the best source of knowledge for you. Okay, I'm not going to say 100% authentic, correct? Let's keep 20% out. The 20% comes from, personal angst and so on and so forth. 80% or 75% of it is going to be correct based on your exit interview. Then you start saying where the gaps are, what the problems are, start speaking about it to leaders. So there comes Madhu's point, and then start holding people accountable. People do not refer to their exit interviews as much as they should be referring to, or some people don't even do exit interviews. They're like, okay, bye, goodbye, kind of thing, right? But when people leave, they are more honest than when people are at the job, because they want to keep the job, they want to keep their salary, so they're just not going to be completely honest. But who cares, right? When I'm leaving, I will be as honest as possible. That is the real gold mine.
Brilliant. Gold mine of thoughts that were unfiltered is right. Yep.
I think what Bryan said kind of resonated well with me as well. One thing I've noticed generally with EVP projects is they're very gung-ho about putting the pillars and the definition together, like in general. But the minute you need to start integration, and integration is a very complicated process, right? Because you're looking at benefits, you're looking at what people hear, touch, feel, sense on a daily basis. I see things kind of dying at that point, and that's a sad reality.
Brilliant. Thank you for all these thoughts. I guess we've spent good part of 1 hour discussing different aspects of what happens when your employee value proposition is too generic, right? So just to summarize it, and then I'll hand it to Bryan to sort of give us his parting thought. But what we've had today so far clearly is that EVP is not a wallpaper. It's a promise. It's a living idea, and it needs to be nurtured like a plant. If you don't attend to it, it will wilt away, or it will be something of static view of what you were once upon a time. So you will become a has-been if you don't have a current EVP. Get it? We also said language matters, but culture matters more. So how people experience you and your culture is more important than what you say on your job descriptions, that this is who we are. We live in an age of transparency, so people's voices are important. So whether they say it publicly on a platform or just go and whisper into their friends' ears, storytelling cannot replace substance. You can tell whatever stories you want if they are not rooted in reality. And the final part is that risk of being too generic is not that you will become irrelevant. It's a given, but it will also sort of breed a mistrust in your brand. So you need to know that you're going to be here 3 years, 4 years, 10 years from now, and your challenges will only become complex if you don't address it now. Every year when you go to the market and trying to hire fresh talent, or not, you will need people to run your businesses, because at the end of the day, we are creating products and services for people, not for AI. Right. So with that, I guess instead of, in a true blue sense, I generally give a bit of a closing sentiment. But Bryan, I would like you to do that today.
Thank you. I have to say thank you, Madhu. Thank you, Manas, for really doing this. Let's talk. Don't do the polished corporate stuff. That sounds great in presentations, but basically means nothing on a Monday morning. We help people figure it out. We work with employer brand specialists such as Madhu and Manas, but I also bring in behavioral scientists. I'm not somebody who knows it all. We bring in psychologists. We bring in people to help build the EVPs. I'm there to push, but the ones who are doing the work are the experts that Let's Talk works with. I honestly think that the best places to work aren't ones with perfect cultures. And, no household is perfect. So how do you expect a workplace to be perfect, especially if you call yourself family? I always say that do not come from a place of fear. Come from a place of confidence, come from a place of, I can say my piece and I know I will be heard. May not always be accepted, but at least I know I'm going to be heard. That being said, I think if anybody wants to get in touch with Let's Talk, you can connect with me, Bryan at letstalk.life, and just say thank you. Thank you, Nilesh, for doing this. Thank you, Madhu. Thank you, Manas.
Absolutely. And Nilesh, thank you for being such a wonderful host. Manas, great speaking. We will connect again for sure. And Bryan, will be in touch. Thanks for reaching out and connecting all of us and the wonderful work you're doing there.
Let me thank you all for being absolutely amazing and answering all the questions.
All right.
All right.
Thank you,
Have a
everybody.
lovely
Thank you,
weekend.
guys. Thank you.
All take care. Have a nice weekend.
Take care. All the best.